Yeah. So what I wanted to do is just orient myself to where you guys come from and tell you as a developer. But so I have a startup and I am working on helping software teams improve their productivity.
Yeah.
I come from, since the 90s, studying total quality management and of different industrial processes.
Yes.
But before that, I did animation. So
Animation?
yeah, I did cartoons.
Oh, man.
So I'm really big on using that as a way to push developers forward, because Disney instituted a lot of process improvement in this company. And I'll talk about that, because you were talking about in the last one the biases that management and developers have. So,
Right. Yeah. I have a logical place to go with that, but I can't. My brain's kind of all over the place of how I want to start. So, Om's background is more project management than mine. I never worked in project management. I worked as a QA person on development teams, and I worked as a QA team member on development teams, pushing out commercial software, B2B commercial software, for 5 years as an analyst, and then for the next 5 years, I was a team lead. So I still worked on projects, but I also had I don't know what you would call a team lead. Like, depending on different organizations, team leads get delegated different supervisory type of tasks. I did a lot of hiring, and I would take a first pass on writing people's reviews and stuff like that, but the manager would have the final say and stuff like that. And then I would help projects that were kind of running outside their little lines. I would help them kind of get back in. I would help them kind of get back in. And then I would just jump on projects from time to time that were kind of outside of my scope, just to pull them back in or help when maybe people didn't have training they need, stuff like that. And I was kind of the go-to expert for all things engineering, not necessarily because I was better at coding than anyone else, just because I had the desire to do stuff outside of my small box of analysis. When you think of QA people, you think of they're writing test procedures and they're writing test cases and they're writing suites of testing that need to be run. The best QA people, in my opinion, are the ones that kind of get the juices flowing in the development team to start getting the developers thinking about how to test before they've written a line of code, before they've written anything.
Right.
Because all the developers that I've worked with, this might be a lie, all the developers that I've worked with, they're all under the gun to get the software out as fast as possible.
All the time, yeah.
As fast as possible, right? So it's an efficiency metric, and if they're going to be judged and measured by something, it's efficiency. How fast, how many lines of code? I can remember at the start of my career, I remember metrics like this, like errors per line of code or requirements per line of code or something like that, per lines of code.
Yeah.
Now I'm like, measuring anything per lines of code is kind of ridiculous when you think about it.
Yeah.
Who cares?
But it's one of the easiest metrics. And a lot of programmers take issue with it, but they can't identify why it's problematic.
Yeah.
So I try to help. There are better metrics to use. So I try to get them to use function points, if you will, or Cosmo function points, which is a tool to measure the actual activity that the code does.
Yeah.
So that you measure how much code they're working on, but then you want to go into a little bit more abstract or reduced technical debt by measuring classes or methods, lines per function.
Yeah.
So that you spread activity among more functions and classes so that they're easier to modify. Check for bugs. When you have a small surface area to check, it's much easier to find when things are wrong.
So what it sounds like to me is you're trying to say, is my code a monolith, or is it actually like, can I modify? Is it maintainable, basically?
Yes. Yes.
I say it's like monolith in my head means not maintainable. Like,
right.
I don't know. I don't know if that translates to anyone else's head, but
yeah, but that very often that is the case. What they call a God class, which is trying to do a whole bunch of different things rather than maintaining a single function perspective.
Yeah. When I did engineering, when I did QA engineering, Java was my programming language of choice. And sometimes I do interviews, and they ask me the question basically. They don't ask me this exact question, but the question they're asking me is, what are you doing to maintain your skills? I was like, and usually my initial response to that, I don't give this response because it's not a good response in an interview. But in my head, I'm like, I taught myself to program in Java. Like, there's not, like, I understand that you need to keep rotating your skills, you know what I mean, and learning new skills with the market. But when I learned Python, I was blown away because I'm like, oh, in Java, this is like 25 lines of code. And in Python, it's 2 lines. I was like, I like this better.
And why was it 2 lines?
It's just like saving an object or something like that. You know, you can be a lot sloppier. I say sloppier just because like that's, I come from Java, where you don't need to like the open brackets and stuff. Like if you're doing like a loop or if statement is an if statement in Python, there's no like extra syntax. You just call your colon and then you do the rest of everything you need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and, and you indent and you're good. And as long as if you don't have different plugins inside of your IDE that scream at you, you're okay. It's easy.
That is one way to improve your code and help it be more maintainable, organized, whatever, because you're not worrying about braces or indentation.
Yeah.
With Python, you're forced to actually look at the indentation, otherwise it behaves differently.
Yeah. I always liked my code to be pretty, so I never had a problem with that, but I've worked with people who didn't care about that. So,
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah. Well, one of my favorite languages is C.
Yeah.
And in that one,
forget
it. Yeah, that's
C.
White space doesn't matter at all.
When I was in college, that was the first programming class I went through, was C programming. And my teacher, for C programming, I don't know if the class was too big or the teacher was not a good teacher. I don't know which one it was.
I'll go with the teacher was not a good teacher.
Maybe a combination. I don't know, because I hated it. I absolutely hated it, and nothing made sense. Mm-hmm. I passed. I don't know how I passed. But then when I went on to the upper level electives at the College of Engineering, I took a SQL class. It was like a requirement. It was like one of the entry level. You get into the College of Engineering, you have to take certain classes. SQL is one of them. I don't know if the actual class was SQL or if the class was databases. I don't remember. This was like the early 2000s though. So it's like now, if you go through a air quotes databases class, hopefully they'll teach you about a whole bunch of different types of database, like schemaless databases and schema databases, relational databases, non-relational, NoSQL type of deal. Then it was like all relational database. And the guy, I still remember the guy showed up to class. The very first day of class, he was like, my job in this class is not to teach you how to write SQL. He's like, I'm not going to be doing that. So if you want to learn SQL, you have to do it on your own. And then every single assignment he gave us was all hardcore writing SQL statements.
See, that's one of the things I was going to discuss with you about developers is that there's a huge selective bias in it, because we learned by trial and error, and we will spew whatever BS that we can believe it. If we think it's true, that's all that counts. It's not like we're purposely lying. But we will spew whatever we imagine the solution is, because unless the compiler tells us there's a syntax error or the code doesn't do what it does, we're right.
Yeah, it worked.
And the problem with it is that then the developer will say anything, and there's usually nothing in a party conversation or anything else that can disprove him, and he just thinks he's right all the time, because the interest that he's pursuing tells him he can say anything, and unless the compiler says this is an error or you have the wrong type mismatch, or the code doesn't work the way it was expected to, it's going to be an error.
Yeah. Well, under the banner of bad habits, QA is in the exact same position where when you have a bug that comes in, like let's say a user reports a bug, right? User reports a bug, you tell them to go back, try something else, whatever, and they're like, oh yeah, okay, that works, and the bug goes away. You're like, okay, I resolved it. Nobody's complaining. It's gone.
Right.
Like, let's forget about it.
Yeah.
Right. It's same. It's the same mode of thinking. It's like maybe there's a deeper problem happening. I've also been in a position because I was a manager of QA at one point, and you have different levels of. Development is the same way. Like you have different people who, when they get a problem, they dig into it until they get their first explanation, and then they're happy with the first. Everyone's happy with the first. Yeah, right. But then you get certain people who are not happy until they can replicate it every time.
Yep.
Okay.
Those are quality people.
Those are the best people
you want to get.
Right. Yes. Those are the best people. Okay. But depending on how you're measured in your time.
Yes.
When I was a team lead, I distinctly remember that. Oh, you bring back horror stories. When I was a team lead in QA, we got escalated to us customer problems. All right, customer would call in to support, and theoretically in support, you had the first level support. They weren't called engineers; they were called like support
reps,
whatever. Yeah, support reps. Yeah, tech support.
Now you're bringing my horror things back.
They were the first level people, and they would answer the phone, and they would try to talk about the problem and figure out what it is. And if they couldn't figure it out, they had engineers that sat in the little support area, and the engineer would walk over to the person's desk. The engineer had their own desk. They'd walk over to the person's desk and sit with them and try to work them through the issue with. And if they couldn't do it, they'd just say, send the customer to my cube, and then they'd transfer the customer to the engineers, and then the engineer would sit down with the customer and try to actually log onto their system remotely and try to work through the system. But if it went through first line support and the second line engineer, like someone I would trust that they knew about networking and Active Directory and permissions and stuff like that. Stuff that had nothing to do with commercial software,
right?
But has a huge impact on commercial software. Most of those people, as a normal job, they have to sift through what is our software and what is not our software. Because you might have other problems in your network, right?
Right.
Latency issues, whatever.
Registry or something.
Yeah. And I should really put that on a sticky to discuss after I get done with my rambling on this topic, because like the longer and longer time goes on in this industry, the less and less people know anything about networking and latency and permissions and how they affect your, scalability and how that affects your application. But at that point in the company, I would only get escalated the worst, most ambiguous problems, the most, the most complex problems with the most complex customers, most complex systems. And I was very lucky at that point in time where I may have gotten judged, and I might just be forgetting it. Maybe I didn't care. I don't know. But I never got judged by, like, for example, like a QA person would get judged by, like, how many support issues do you get escalated and do you take care of?
How long does it take?
And how long does it take? Yeah, you couldn't, like, if you try to judge me against the other analysts, my numbers would look terrible. Absolutely terrible. But when the manager gets the issues, triages them, and sends them to a different person to work on, I only get the worst. I get the worst of the worst. Not just the worst of the worst. I have to pull a developer in and sit together and download the customer's logs, like all their logs, gigs and gigs of logs, and look through. This is like enterprise application systems. So it's like before everyone was like had all their logs in a nice crawlable format in the cloud, where they search just once and it searches all the logs automatically. No. We had to go through 5-6 servers worth of logs one at a time, looking for which server had the error. Yeah. So yeah, the metrics. Like, honestly, I feel we don't harp on this enough.
No.
Of how bad, like measuring the wrong things. There are things you can measure because they are easy to measure, like lines of code, but that's not the right thing to measure.
No, not at all.
I don't remember how we got on this topic, so I feel like we're right on with a normal podcast right now.
You want metrics to be able to monitor the processes. So I'm a big fan or proponent of statistical quality control, Schuhart, Deming, all that sort of stuff. And first of all, you have to define what your process is. Then you begin measuring it.
Right.
And so that you can determine what parts can be improved, where performance is an issue, et cetera. And having the right metrics is important. But one of the things that managers and even other team members sometimes, because it's been part of the culture, is utilization. Make sure everybody's busy working all the time, and that's not good. Both with Deming and with Goldratt, with the theory of constraints, what you want to do is examine the overall process.
Right.
And the big problem right now is, to improve it, you need to measure the right stuff, know what you're measuring, and focus on, with the theory of constraints, where the bottlenecks are, and correcting that. And with software, the biggest bottleneck is the programmers, because we're in the dark ages, and the only people who can read and write code are the programmers. So everybody else, if you value stream the organization, customer support, technical writers, sales, marketing, whatever, they have to go through how the software is, what it does, and adding features and stuff like that. And then you're going to have to talk to programmers. And when you do, you take them off of programming. So that means they're not doing where their most value comes. So they become they're the bottleneck for the rest of the system. So if you can eliminate that aspect of it, you can free up both sides of the coin.
I think that's probably one of the, it's not directly mentioned in the Scrum Guide as a core benefit, but that's one of the aims of the Scrum model, is that you should only have, assuming that you're not, assuming that it's working correctly, you should only have a 20% overhead, bureaucratic overhead, meetings and whatever, other stuff to your model. Again, assuming you're only on one team and you're not, at some ridiculous organization where you're like 5 teams or something like that. So 20% of your overhead is, air quotes, non-productive. Like a developer would think non-productive, but it's productive because you're doing planning and stuff like that, but non-coding type effort.
Right.
But I say this whenever I've been a Scrum Master before, you need to keep an eye on that number, that 20%. And you need to ask the developers, like, what else are you doing that's adding more time away from your desk, from your focus? I remember I would tell the developers all the time, usually it's not the people directly involved with Scrum. It's not your Scrum Master, it's not your product owner, stuff like that. Those are not the people. It's usually going to be somebody involved in the organization that really doesn't give a crap about your deadlines or whatever. They really only care about what they're doing. That's going to come and blow all your time boxes out of the water.
Right.
It's going to be like your team lead or your manager's manager or somebody else in some other department that's not on any of your teams.
Well, that's why an organization or the processes have to be measured. I think that programmers and other team members, all the knowledge workers, should have their activity kind of like monitored, tracked, so that you can tell where the time is going.
What would you track? I think the more and more time I put in this career field, the more and more I start to think, I'm going to sound terrible when I say this, the more and more I start thinking like anyone who's in a non-creative role, or the people are going to be like, oh, I'm creative. I'm very creative. That's what people, like, okay. All right. Yeah. Sure. Everyone's unique and special. Right. Whatever. Anyone in the organization who does not directly create 100% of their job for a living, like they need to back off of trying to measure development and just trust that development is doing their job. If we go back to the Agile manifesto, are we delivering valuable software on a predictable cadence. That needs to be written on a wall in spray paint in the development area. Like if value number one is true,
in the manager's office as well.
Everywhere. If value number one is true, like I don't care about measuring anything else. And now that I've like kind of grabbed the wheel and pulled it hard to one side to move my career towards product management, whenever I talk to new companies, that's the thing I ask them. I try to vet out from them, is there a difference in the way that you deal and interact with your development teams when you're delivering software on a regular cadence and everything's going well versus when things are not going well and you have some hiccups, some deadlines start getting missed? Because if there's a difference, I don't want to be in your culture. I don't want to be part of your organization.
Well, and what was the reason that they started getting hiccups in the processes? I support measuring it and going beyond or going for more than just if we're successfully delivering on a regular cadence.
Yeah.
Because if you can get the team to be more productive, where there's less of their time is being consumed with the non-development aspects of it,
yeah.
You can begin to outperform your competitors.
Oh, no doubt.
And
yeah, no doubt.
And so that gives you a huge edge.
Yeah.
Now, coming from animation, so let me go. This is the book, The Illusion of Life, done by two of the old school Disney animators that were there when Disney, after Mickey Mouse became popular, they were brought in and they were trained and developed the craft of animation. They went through the process. So they talk about a lot of the stuff that's there. And I want to go over some of the things there because the same things apply to software. For one thing, it's humans are doing the work. So a lot of the mind just works similarly across industries.
Sure.
A brain is, for the most part, a brain.
Yeah.
But because Walt focused on process improvement and how he improved the process, it pays to look at how the Disney studio improved the quality of the work, which in 1928, when Mickey Mouse came out, it was a black and white. It was the first silent cartoon. So they had made 3 cartoons. The first 3 were silent.
Right.
But then talkies came out, so they redid, or they added sound to the third one, Steamboat Willie.
Yeah.
And from the rubber arm hose type animation of Mickey Mouse and Steamboat Willie to 10 years later, they did Snow White, a full-length movie, which people expected to bomb.
Yeah, well, actually, I just listened to Aidan McCullen. He has a book that I just bought and was reading about this story earlier this week, where all of the animations up until that point, Cinderella, before the first movie, or Snow White, I'm sorry, before the first movie, they were all shorts meant to be added to the beginning of another movie.
Right.
And then he tried to drum up support, support meaning funding, and nobody would believe in him.
Right.
I believe even his brother, who was part of his organization at that point, wouldn't back him on that venture. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, they co-founded the studio. It was originally called the Disney Brothers Studio.
Yeah, right.
But yeah, he didn't. He was just like, Walt, you're betting a lot of money. But Walt knew they made some money from the shorts, but the big money was in the feature films.
Right.
So if they wanted to do that, if they wanted to like control their own destiny, they would have to start making their own features. So, and it was a huge gamble. And his brother didn't believe in a lot of the projects he did, but he had such fraternal love for his brother. He was just like, okay, do it. And most of the things that they tried succeeded. So, and in a big way. So, but let me read this little bit that talks about this. This led Ben Sharpstein to claim that animation was developed far more by the animators themselves than by Walt. This is true of the specific techniques that advanced the art. But the advancement would never have occurred without Walt. As Les Clark said, Animation developed because of Walt's insistence and supervision. The animator had to wrestle with the problem of how to make the drawings work properly, but without Walt's drive, it is doubtful that any of them would have tried so hard or learned what to do. So it's the same thing with the software industry. We've actually regressed because since most of the existing talent in the field right now has learned things on the job. They're self-taught. There is very little historical backdrop to everything that's done.
Right.
So we've lost a lot of advancements that were done. We've lost a lot of familiarity with processes from other industries, and so we're backwards. Without a formal system to bring everyone up to speed and maintain that level and push it forward, we're going to continue to see this.
Yeah. That's annoying to me, I think.
It should be.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I'm working on correcting, but you basically have to say, listen, these are the different levels of activity that people do, and your performance or your organization's performance is at this point, and we have the numbers that show that. If you change, other teams are able to go this level or that level, and that way you can, once you have a formal process of measuring and improving, then the profession can improve again. But that has to be forced. And management doesn't know how to do it because they have a similar problem, actually. Because a lot of them just learn things on the job. They're promoted from different fields, and so they're not really given the training to do this stuff.
Yeah, Om and I also have another thing on the podcast where we say the term IT, like everything used to be IT, like it's not vogue to be IT anymore. Everything has to be like broken into, like you got the DevOps guys over there, and you got the release engineers over there, and you get you get the software engineers over there, and you get the QA people over here. Everyone's got their niche term now that only applies to them. But in actuality, you think about it, I mean, they're all operating in their own specific little areas. And it's not, I mean, one area can learn another. You can kind of move over and get some cross-functionality. However, the field is very large. It's very expansive as far as like what skills there is. I know how hard it is to learn everyone's job just in development teams. So I can only imagine if you're trying to manage, like, the job title that I see people performing, and it just bewilders me how they even try to do it as delivery managers. Because I'm like, well, you're not a project manager, and you're not a scrum master, and you're not a program manager. What the hell is a delivery manager? What is a delivery manager? Like, what are you doing? I mean, are you the Ohm loves to coin this term. Are you the organizational one neck to choke when a deadline gets missed? Is that the role? Or are you the rebranded old school project manager who would just run around from cube to cube to ask, hey, when is it going to be done? Do you think you're going to be done today? You're going to be done by lunchtime? Or you think you'll be done? Like, if you've ever worked I was going to say, that was early in my career. I was exposed to old school project managers like that would just get all over you. And then if you dare to use a word like, it should be done by about lunchtime. I think if everything goes well, I think it should be done. They'd be like, oh, should be done? Should? Oh, somebody doesn't know. Oh, it'd be a big deal. And I'm like, what? I'm just trying to do my job, man. I'm trying to keep my head down and do my job. What do you? Get out of my cube. Like, I can't do anything when you here.
Yeah. Well, now it won't be done until after dinner because you're in my cube.
Yeah, you're in my area. Yeah. And then you get pushback. But I feel that we've traded certain things from the old school way when I started my career till now. We've just traded certain things for other
absolutely.
things.
Yeah. No, for one thing, it's just very simplistically, what is it? Someone comes up with an idea, and maybe somebody designs a couple screens, or usually the programmer just begins coding it and builds a project, and then they start adding features, and it goes through beta. It looks good, release it. So the former waterfall, the various stages that were done, requirements, analysis, design, coding, testing, release, that no people don't usually follow that because it's formal, and people are just like you said, in a hurry to get things delivered.
Sure. Yeah.
So it's skipping steps, avoiding checking requirements, checking designs, et cetera, et cetera. So it's just blow through it.
So it's all dirty words now. It's dirty words now.
It is. Now that's when it's similar to the thing with animation. Before, in the silent days, for example, and even at other studios in the early days, the people that did the cartoons were the animators.
Right.
So the shorts were like 7-8 minutes long.
Yeah.
Which is like 1,500 feet. There's a certain number of feet of film that it takes.
Yeah.
So if you have like 4 animators, 5 animators, each one gets a certain amount of film of that.
Right.
And then they begin doing the drawings, the number of drawings necessary for that. And they do whatever gags they want to. And then at the end, the director would look at the gags in the films, figure out a beginning and an end, and just put them together, and that was it. So there was no formal process for it.
Yeah.
And Walt's insistence on establishing a story, developing characters, and all of that stuff behind the story and character development is what helped make the studio cartoons stand out over everyone else. That insistence on process.
Right. Yeah. I would also argue, over and above that, it was his vision of the next thing. Like, we have to get better. We have to do better. Like, I have a vision of what I want to do, and the current way that we're doing things isn't going to cut it to get to where I want to be. Mm-hmm. And I don't want to say wherever they were at was never good enough, because that's not a good way to paint it. But
that is true.
It was good enough to hit the goal he had at that time, but then he was constantly reinventing to come up with new goals. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? It's not like he was the parent that was never happy with anything that was.
No, well, I mean it's
maybe it was. I don't know.
They talk about it in this book, and that's why I say this book is the current best volume on software process improvement, because it discusses how the animators and how Walt dealt with things and how they move forward. And the authors say Walt was a pragmatist. He accepted what they had at the time. Yeah. But like you said, he was pushing for, we got to make feature films. Yeah. Oh, we got to make this art form as respected as Salvador Dali works, as fine art. Fantasia was one of the products of that. Yeah. The
Carol Dweck mindset book. I'll cut all this out because it has nothing to do with what we're talking about. Because that Carol Dweck mindset book is like, if I can only suggest one book to someone to basically change their life, I'd be like, go read this mindset book.
All right.
Because she very clearly describes the fixed versus growth mindset. I guess I got to leave this in because I'm talking about it now. She has a whole chapter about professional athletes. Okay? She has a whole chapter about professional. She's like, professional athletes, they get into it when they're young, usually, and the professional athletes that don't cut it are told, oh, you're so great, you're so athletic. It's like you're not even trying. You just do everything on their own. And like those people, slowly over time, will get surpassed and eclipsed by like the Michael Jordans, who just go out there on a basketball court every day, 3 hours before any of their other teammates are out there shooting baskets. Mm-hmm. After all the teammates go home and are going off and going to clubs, going drinking, whatever, still out there on the court at night. You know what I mean?
Honing their craft.
Yeah, just can't let go. And the people who basically were always told, oh, you're so great at this. You just like maybe the first time they picked up the ball, they were better than all. She goes back to like early childhood in the book. She's like, oh, when you're on the, I can't remember what example she uses. When you're in elementary school, basically, and you just take to it naturally, and you're the best person at baseball or whatever. Like all the kids are like, oh, I want to be on that person's team, you know. But then that person at that point, very rarely are they the major league player later in their life, because they had natural talent, yes, but like because they relied on I was so good or whatever, they never had to practice, they never had to put in the effort. And that goes like that was a really long story to take us back to, dude, the best developers that I work with, they don't take the first like, oh, it happened one time, now the customer's not having the problem anymore, and now we're okay. Yeah. Okay, whatever. I'll move on to the next thing. They're not that. They're like, no, I need to know why this failed. I have to look through every single server log, even the ones that didn't have problems, to see if they had any kind of like informational errors.
Any hints or something.
I got to look in the code to make sure that all of these pass through the code result in errors, and none of them are just informational problems that aren't getting logged, because maybe, these pass through the code don't get logged as errors. So they would never show up in a server log or an alert. So now I got to do a deep dive through pieces of code that maybe no one's ever worked on. Those are the best developers.
Yeah. Well, it's like in one of the Galaxy Quest, the only Galaxy Quest movie. Because does the captain not know every bolt in the ship? You know, not everything. So if something's not behaving in the way that the developer expects it to, then he's going to be like, okay. Well, the other thing is that due to brain chemistry or whatever, they like to have every problem solved.
Yeah. Right.
So if there's a problem, they want to have it solved, and they're just not content with it went away.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah.
The customer's not experiencing it anymore. So.
That comes from I've seen that come from development management more than anyone else. Like, no, we have to spend more time to figure out what the root cause or whatever it was.
Right.
A product, I would figure product would be the first people to abandon it, to be like, I don't care. Like, give me my feature. Yeah. You brought up something that I wanted to touch on. I wrote down permission to fail. That's one of the things I wrote down on my thing, because a lot of companies talk about, you have permission to fail. We have to learn from our failures. But like I know. Yeah, I know. I know why you're laughing. I know you're laughing, because let me preface this for people that are only listening to this and don't watch. Okay, there's a cone of failure / disappointment, and that cone directly represents stress on your whole team. And the closer you get to the whatever air quotes deadline, the bigger that cone becomes. So I like to hear organizations talk about, you have permission to fail here.
One of the animators, Seamus Culhane, he left. Disney had that thing. One of the things that Disney did was he gave his animators the tools to check their work as they go along. So they actually filmed the animation just as drawings on paper, to be able to see whether the timing was right, everything, all of that stuff. So if there was something wrong, they could just go back and correct it.
Yeah.
That's, in a lot of companies, that would be wasteful, because that's footage that's never going to make it to the public. You don't want them to see that, but why are you wasting time with that? So one of the animators, after he left Disney, was in charge of Fleischer that did the Popeye cartoons. So he was doing scenes, and he did some experiment, and he tried it. He tried to do something, shot the sequence, the test footage, and he came back looking awful. And another animator's looking over his shoulder while he's watching, and he says, that doesn't work. And he says, yeah, no, it was an experiment. Yeah, but it doesn't work. I know it was an experiment.
Yeah.
And other people, whether management or sometimes other tech team members, are just like, they don't take that risk. And if it's not great, then it's like, why did you waste time with it? But that's how you're going to advance anything.
Oh, man, I'm so enraged right now. Because as a QA manager, whose company and department were purely manual testing, who moved to a QA engineering centric department, Because until you start doing things, until you ask your people to do things they've never done before, and until you give your people the runway to experiment with things and fail on the runway, they're never going to learn anything new. And if your team members are so in tune with avoiding failure that they're going to go around those opportunities, because there is nothing at the end of a sprint, or whatever, cycle of time, whatever, that they can show as an accomplishment. It seems like a failure.
Yeah.
Because there's nothing to measure that shows success or whatever. Yeah, maybe you didn't accomplish a business objective, but you increased the capabilities of one of your team members. Okay? How else are your team members earning new capabilities? Either you, the manager, you're giving them time in the day to expand their capabilities. Hey, we don't know how to program in Java. Go learn how to program in Java. In that instance, I knew how to program in Java because I had done some other work on the side, but none of my team members knew how to program in Java.
Wow.
So basically, I would give them a goal. Hey, go connect to this thing in Java. Go figure out how to connect to a device or whatever. Go read a device state in Java and report it back to the screen. And then when you do that, call me in, and I'm going to sit over your shoulder, and we're going to sit together and look at the code.
Oh, wow. That's great.
Okay. And we're going to sit, but I remember the first time I asked somebody to sit over my shoulder and look at my code. It was terrifying to ask somebody to sit and look over your shoulder and critique you on the code that you wrote. You might as well be telling somebody to sit and critique me on my life choices. It is scary. You
have to learn how to balance what's important to bring up right now, which to do sometime, if ever, later.
Listen, I'm after that experience, I'm convinced that there are workplaces that encourage that culture, and then there's everywhere else.
Oh yeah,
because feeling open enough for someone to sit over, like someone sitting over your shoulder and critiquing the way you wrote code, that is a very personal thing.
So this animator, the same one, when he started at Disney, he had years of experience in New York. So this guy was a big shot at the studios there, and some people had left New York and gone to California to go with Disney.
Yeah.
And they got hired. And so this guy thinks, I'm going to be a big star animator or whatever.
Yeah.
He gets there and it's like, you're not good enough to be here. And he took his pay cut and became an in-betweener just so that he can be at Disney. And he was assigned to animator who's already been going through the Disney school. And he did this sequence. And when he finished the sequence, he took it to his supervisor, the animator, who took the pages, didn't even look at it, and threw it in the trash. So, as intimidating, there are different ways that you can get them to figure that they need to work harder or rethink.
Yeah, knowing that you're going into a session where you're going to have a more senior person sitting over your shoulder and looking at the code you wrote, like that is a motivator right there.
It should be.
Yeah.
That's one of the reasons Disney had set up these classes. Before he set up the classes, so he set them up in 1935. The studio had already had 7 years of success with Mickey Mouse and Silly Symphonies, won some Academy Awards for shorts and whatnot. And they set up these classes so that they could develop the skills of the animators for rudimentary drawing, life drawing, so that they can get the figures to look more realistic, and motion, and because their drawings had to look like they were actually moving. So they came up with design patterns for cartoon animation. Design patterns is a term that we use in software to describe the organization of some code,
right?
But the similar thing exists in almost everything, where a solution that works, you identify it and you apply it in different places, and then you can see how you can stretch it, manipulate it, try different changes, reverse it, etc.
Yeah.
So they did that as well. But the courses, the teacher would go over the animator's work and critique it and bring it up in the class and say, hey, this is what's good, or this is what's not good, and in front of the whole studio, basically, of the other animators. Sometimes Walt would go through an animator's drawings at night, go through the trash can, pick out drawings that look good, take them out, and say, this is good. In the early days, Walt had a desk near all the other animators, and he would have them bring their stuff over, and he would review it. If you had something similar to that for coders, some places have code review where everyone goes over the code and tries to make it better. Yeah. But there's no formal training process revolved around that.
Right. Yeah.
And Disney had classes after work where they just instituted, and it just elevated the skill level of it, not only of bringing everyone up to a professional level, but it pushed the art form beyond anything that had existed before.
Yeah.
And it's a similar thing that we need for software now.
Yeah, I would expect that in a normal software development shop, that would be something coming from the leads. Maybe depending on the size of the software development shop, you might have leads, you might have power leads, over departments or segments or, whatever of the software. But maybe it'd be something on like a director of development level. You usually expect people at that level to have a certain proficiency in software. It's not always true. Mm-hmm. Sometimes the most political person gets promoted to that level. But I've met several people who, at the level of the director of software development, like director manager of software development, they're excellent at helping more junior people refine their skill, refine their code, refine their craft. Mm-hmm. And not in a judgmental way either. No. It's usually the judgmental stuff usually comes from without
or other developers within the team. You find a lot of those,
or people with a more fixed mindset. Mm-hmm. People who, what you're talking about now. I'm at a crossroads because I want to start talking about what makes a good lead or manager in development department. Uh-huh. The other side of that is those people who have a very fixed mindset, that they're the people who react poorly to bad code reviews and
criticism and things like that.
Yeah, they react poorly to criticism and deadlines and other things where they have to make trade-offs. I've interacted with a lot of people like that too, but honestly, I feel like people like that, they kind of single themselves out. They make it known that they really can't hold up. I'd rather be more interested in talking about the people on the other side that really are the development managers and development leads who will help you understand why you should do something different in your code, or why you should change the way that you've written your code or whatever. I remember that when I was a QA engineer, I had no one to code review with me. Mm-hmm. No one. Because there was no one in the QA department who was an engineer. So I had no one to bounce off not only what I was doing as a coder, mm-hmm. As a programmer, but what I was teaching people. I had nobody to bounce anything off because nobody else programmed in Java. It was a C# shop. C# and .NET shop.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah. I always tell people, especially people in QA, I'm like, if you can have a choice to program and do automated testing, it's probably best to do your automation in the same language as whatever your programmers in-house are doing, because eventually you'll learn that it's just important to write the tests, and then it doesn't really matter who programs the tests. It matters that the tests that are important get written and get put down somewhere, and that you guys as a business together can decide what is important and what is not. Mm-hmm. Because I've been at different organizations with different challenges. One organization was, we need to automate more tests so we can have more coverage of our back end and front end, whatever, mm-hmm. Automated tests. So whenever we make a build, It runs a little script and it kicks off our automation. And when our automation runs, it runs a test on the new build or whatever, the new release or whatever. And it sends a little report that says, oh, your new release passed, X number of tests or failed X number of tests. And here's why, here's the failures, and you can make a decision. I was like, that's okay. That's okay. The better thing is, like, when we start developing a feature, we ask, how is this going to be tested? And then we build that in to our testing at the very beginning. So all that stuff is integrated. But I've been in the completely opposite side where so many automated tests run, you have to start making a decision of, every time I kick off a build, do I really want to wait 8-12 hours for all the automation to finish? Like, is all this really necessary?
Right.
Okay. I've been on both sides. I've been on the first side of like, what do we want to do? And I've been on the other side of like, do we really need to keep doing all this stuff? I'm very thankful in my career for having both those perspectives, because usually people either have one or the other and not both. Either they're in my shop doesn't automate anything, so everything's manual. A lot of shops really, believe it or not, like a lot of like unit testing might be automated more than anything else. But a lot of like API backend tests or front end UI tests and stuff like that, a lot of shops are still struggling just with that kind of stuff. Yeah,
a lot of places don't even test.
Yeah,
they're just like
automation.
It's not even just automation. Getting to this programmer mentality where he'll throw anything out, and if it sticks, then you go forward with it.
Yeah.
And so they do what I characterize as optimistic coding, where they write code.
Optimistic coding.
They write code.
Oh man!
And once they've seen that it works, then they'll do a build, send it over to QA to test it, and they don't put in there tests that results come back from other underlying functions, foundational functions, that the results are valid, that they got the memory they were trying to allocate, or the data came back from the server. Or if there's a user error, the network is down.
Closing all your connections and you're not creating memory leaks. And like very few QA departments are like looking out for what I would consider deep stuff like that. Closing all your database connections when you're done with them. Cleaning that stuff up. Cleaning up your threads and your handles and all that. Like, thank you for the 2 users that are sticking with us on this podcast, because we're super deep now. You mentioned Deming earlier, and I didn't go there when you mentioned him because I feel like I go there too often. I'm gonna do it in a whole episode. That's 100% Deming, because Deming's like quality is that's the low. That should be the floor of where you start.
Right.
Okay. It's like the base level is it quality? Is it good? Okay, yeah, it's good. But then what does it do?
Right.
Like, that's the floor. and like that's where I feel a lot of people, I especially feel for the developers that I work with in my career, you could have achieved so much more if the base level quality that was asked of you is like, well, it's got to be good, rather than just get something out. And Agile suffers from this too, with the concept of MVP and the concept of a minimum in a sprint or whatever, prioritization in a sprint.
Well, that shouldn't be part of Agile anyways. That came all from the lean startup world, and they're not really doing the quality stuff at that stage, because they're just trying to prove an idea. The quality stuff is an expense for them. It's just experiment, throw it away. They're not even supposed to keep it.
But that's not the way. Like with garbage, that's not the way to prove an idea. No. That's not. I probably should do a whole nother. That's on my list, but it's not super high on my list in terms of priorities. To go back over the lean startup, to go back over the actual original concept of the lean startup. It's not high on my list because it's one of those concepts that like I don't have a lot of positives.
It doesn't affect the organizations that you're in are for established organizations,
Right.
so you don't need to worry about that
Yeah.
unless they're going to try a new product idea,
A radically new.
a radically new product idea. They don't need to worry about the process that they're trying to have quality is experimenting and iterating.
Yeah.
That's a different process.
Right.
Now, developing the software, what they're doing in chemical engineering, you have the R&D lab that tries making new chemicals and new processes. Boom, something comes up. Hey, this works. Now let's build a prototype chemical plant to make sure to see if we can scale it up.
Yeah.
There was an old commercial. We figured out how to process one check correctly. And then we scaled that up to do it, 200 million times a year,
Right.
without problems, because you're scaling it up.
Right.
And you going through those steps are what other industries do. The software industry is not very good at scaling up their organizations, but they go from R&D, just experiment. Then once they have that works, then give it to the clean developers, the professional ones, and they will code it using a quality process
Right.
in order to put it into production.
Yeah. You spend your truly experimental. I want to call it dirty, but it's not. Like that's not a great word. Your unproven practices with a specific team. But I feel again. We're going back to a theme on the Agile podcast of you only do that because your budget centers, the way you're traditionally doing finance and budgeting is messed up. You don't need to leverage another team to do that. You can use your existing teams because even if they don't produce something that goes into production or something that goes to your customers that your customers notice, they're still expanding their capabilities. They're expanding their ability. Okay, the modern organization might call it they're spending time training themselves, like an on-the-job training type of activity. They wouldn't call it that inside of a sprint because nobody's gonna mark a story as what's the deliverable of the story? Well, the development team learns how to, do continuous delivery.
We learned how to use Kubernetes or something.
Yeah,
like
we know.
that.
We figured out how to use Docker or whatever. Nobody's gonna do that.
But that's wrong. Okay, in the Disney studio, typically used cartoons to do experimentation and to try new processes, and they could incorporate it as as a somewhat of a profit generator if it worked. They tried color. Did it make an impact?
Yeah.
Boom. They went with color for a while. Mickey stayed black and white, and while they had another line of cartoons that were color, they came out with a movie to experiment with a 3D like technology called the multiplane camera. And they did it called the Old Mill. With their color series, the Silly Symphonies, the color series that they did was their experimental. They could try different things, and with the Old Mill, there was no dialogue or anything like that. It's just a mill, and it's a lightning storm. And it won an Academy Award. So they were experimenting, and in addition, they won an Academy Award, get some more prestige and stuff like that. And that people really loved the effect. But like you said, the budgeting processes that companies use is all messed up. It's designed for project-oriented businesses or activities, as opposed to line of business and software.
You said project-oriented. My brain translated that again because Ohm has beat me up so many times. My brain translated that to efficiency oriented, which is a finance guy sitting in a chair to say, oh, well, you spent $3.78 in order to make, get out of my office. I don't even want to hear it. We're trying to win an Academy Award.
Right.
Put a price to that. or
the dynamics totally change.
or the dynamics have nothing to do with it. Because if you think about winning Academy Awards, like, well, what other films this year, or what actresses, what actors, what the animation, you have all kinds of stuff that maybe you can make the case it can be measured. So the point is, what is my goal? Oh, I want to prove that animation is here to stay. I want to win an Academy Award. I want to win Best Movie or whatever it is, right?
Yeah.
All of your previous practices up until this point in financing movies or whatever, they don't make sense.
No.
They don't make sense. You need to follow the vision. In Servitude, it's supposed to be the product person. Theoretically, it's supposed to be a product person. Whether it is or not, different organizations, arguable. Probably talk for another hour on that. But finance and HR specifically, and their contributions to development teams, because they're stuck in this 1800s industrial age management practices. You cannot cost cut your way to the next visionary breakthrough.
No. But the other thing is that it's not so much the industrial age processes, but attempting, well, in a sense it is. It's using siloed mentality,
right,
where you're looking at the process piecemeal instead of the synergy of everything combined.
Yeah.
When you help the finance guys see the big picture and how the different parts interrelate, then you can help them see where the inefficiencies are.
Yeah.
One of the things that the finance guys do is they try to reduce risk.
Sure.
So there's a lot of, status reports in triplicate.
I take that off of them and I put that on the product people.
Yes.
That's less stuff the finance people have to pretend that's their normal job, because that's the product people's job now. Mitigation of risk is a product concern.
Yeah.
In the new market, right?
Well, nowadays CFOs are trying to integrate more and trying to integrate more of the IT part.
Alfonso, you pushing all my buttons tonight.
Yeah, good.
The CFOs are the efficiency people. They're the people trying to cost cut the business into the new realm of productivity. But I'm proposing that's not possible. It's not.
Why?
The Walt Disney approach, if he has somebody in his, actually he probably did have somebody in his ear 100% of the time being
his brother. His brother was...
You're probably right. Yeah, you're probably right about that. Hey, don't go by whatever, how big is Disneyland? 50 acres? 150 acres? Don't go buy a giant swath of land in Burbank, Southern California, whatever it is. Compton? I don't know where it is. Anaheim. Don't go buy a huge swath of land. It makes no financial sense. It makes no.
We're a film studio. What are we doing?
Well, you're going to say that we're going to in the future build up enough animated characters in films where we can hopefully in the future build a theme park to those attractions, make attractions to those characters and movies and whatever. That's crazy. That's crazy talk.
It's so out of line.
That's not an efficiency conversation. That's an effectiveness conversation. That's a don't worry. With my movie studio, with my animation studio, with my merchandise, whatever other things he had, right?
Merchandising was big, yeah.
Don't worry. With the stuff that we're doing here, we can make it effective enough where this other purchase will make sense. And then that was in the 50s, and then 10 years later or something, he bought all the property in Orlando, right? Neither of those are efficiency conversations.
No.
They are both effectiveness and long-term conversations, both of which I would argue, again, people can beat me up in the comments, 100% happy to get beaten up in the comments, I would venture to say I've done zero research. I have no idea what I'm talking about, that both times his efficiency people probably told him, you're being an idiot. You have no idea what you're doing.
All the time. All the time. Snow White was called Disney's Folly.
Disney's Folly, right. Yeah, I do know that.
Yeah, because you make shorts. Nobody's going to sit through cartoons, characters for an hour, or 90 minutes, 2 hours. It's just, you're going to lose money. And your studio, it's going to cost you too much, and the studio is going to go out. Some of the other things. He did CinemaScope, new things that he added to it, Disneyland, Walt Disney World. They were all considered pipe dreams.
Yeah.
And just going, his vision was just untenable.
Uh-huh.
They didn't understand where his vision was. Amusement parks in the 40s and the 50s were disgusting.
Yeah.
They were not clean.
Yeah.
They were not maintained. Their equipment was bad.
Sure.
And
like carnivals and stuff like that.
That's basically what it was like.
Right.
And so he said, no, this has got to be totally clean. And it's going to be with rides that both the kids and the parents can ride with together.
Right.
So that the parent, because when he took his daughters to the amusement park, he had to sit on a bench and wait for them to finish the ride.
Yeah.
So a lot of it was just going forward. Now, his biggest dream was for Epcot.
Mm-hmm.
When they bought the property for Florida, he wanted to make a place, an actual city or community where people can live, and he could experiment with new technology, sustainability, sort of stuff.
Yeah.
So he got the state legislator to give him a quasi-autonomous government.
Yeah.
But he died within 2 years of that, purchasing the land, getting the legislative approval.
Right.
And so the company, after his death, they didn't want to be responsible for running a city.
Sure.
So they turned it into a theme park instead, Epcot.
Yeah.
But that's the thing. Without him,
Yeah.
that's a crazy idea. That's a pipe dream. We can't do that, etc.
He still implemented a bunch of things. The monorail, the resorts, the hotels, how they connected to each other, how you can go from different places to each other. Like, what did that have to do with animation studios?
Oh yeah,
What did that have to do with
and it's a
anything?
waste. Just let them go into the parking lot.
Right, yeah.
Why put them in a monorail?
I like
so
that.
fancy.
I like that you brought that up. Like, oh, what a waste! Like, I don't want to think about that. Well, like, that's your typical product person in one product who does not have a systemic view of everything together.
Yes.
That's exactly what they would say.
Yeah.
What a waste! But you know what the funny thing is? Like, that I blame the product person because it's their
Part of it, yeah.
It's their thing to kind of communicate their vision to everybody
Exactly,
else. It's a product
exactly.
person.
Build it up.
But like I could blame anybody. I could lay blame anybody, and it would be equally justified to say, well, the developer on that team would be like, well, I'm not putting time in creating a monorail. That's ridiculous. Why would
my God.
That's not my job. Why would I even think about that? Like,
I learned a program, like I said, on a TRS-80. Well, at going to Radio Shack on their TRS-80.
No, Trash 80.
Yeah,
Oh man,
yeah.
I got a Trash 80 in my garage.
Do
It's
you?
sitting on my toolbox.
Oh.
Absolutely, I'll put a picture.
Oh,
I'll put a picture right in the middle, right here. Oh wait, where's my cameras? Right here. I'll put my Trash 80 picture right up
What
there.
model is it? There were 4 models.
I don't remember what type it is.
But anyways.
I don't remember what type it is. I have to look on the back. I can't remember.
But I then programmed the Macintosh, completely different system. I had to learn that one.
Yep, I remember that.
And there was so much work. The way programs were written with TRS-80, CPM, etc., it was all terminal based. You just type in the commands, etc. Now this GUI stuff, you have to put up a window, you put up views, you had to put up a list, and you had to call all these routines just to get basic functionality. And it was just like, oh, what, all this work, it's just too much effort. But for the user, it makes a world of difference because it was user friendly.
Yeah.
Developer hostile because it was just so much work.
Yeah.
One of the things Steve Jobs said, that they had gone to Xerox PARC and seen all this stuff, and they got so sucked into the graphical user interface, they ignored the object-oriented programming, which would have made programming the Mac so much easier if they had gone with that. But anyways, that's the sort of thing that it puts more upfront effort on the team to plan and execute. But it makes the experience so much better.
Yeah. My viewpoint is like, there's enough of us now who have enough experience where we should be talking about it and then documenting our conversations for other people to find, like messages in bottles. Go break the bottle and read the message inside, and that's what you can expect when you're going down these roads. Like, there's no reason for people to do stuff purely, brand new without any kind of advice or expectation or anything. But so many companies are doing that way.
Like I said, developers have learned on their own.
That is not fair to the junior developers of the world out there. They're learning on their own. They're not doing extreme programming.
Right.
They're not having a more senior person look over their shoulder to help them. You know what I mean? Not waste. I mean, how much time is acceptable to waste as a developer on something before you ask for help? Right. And then when you ask for help, do you have to feel like you did something wrong when you're asking for help?
Well, let me ask you this. How long does a guy drive when he's lost before he stops and asks for directions?
All day.
and that's part of the brain chemistry that we have, the architecture of the brain. For males, we are mission oriented. We have tunnel vision. We're focused on solving or accomplishing our particular mission right now, which is get to whatever our destination is. Stopping and asking for directions is not the same thing. That's stopping and not doing what we're trying to do, which is spend more time driving, which is wasteful. But that's the sort of thing that is the problem behind it. So if we can get past it, it is a problem.
That's a problem, though.
If we set for ourselves a timer, hey, you got 15 minutes to figure this out.
Yeah.
Otherwise, just ask for help.
Yeah.
But another problem with the especially programmers' mentality is I've got to solve this problem. And that's why there's so much not invented here.
Oh, yeah.
Because I've got to figure this out.
Yeah, you just hit on a big theme of the podcast, which is the hero developers. Like, although you brought it up in a new way, which we have not brought up before, which is, I've got to figure this out. You can be a hero, but like, there's a cost that needs to be justified here. Is like, you can be, and the funny thing is, most people in the business are not savvy enough to understand that cost should not have been paid. Like, if you have to lose, World War I, if you have to lose 10,000 men to take 2 feet of the beach, is it worth it?
Yeah.
No, it's not worth it. I will not. 10 out of 10 doctors agreed. They will not make that trade. Okay. I had a developer that I used to work with who would say, if you spend more than, I can't remember what it was less than an hour. He basically said, if you have to spend more than an hour and you're not making progress, stop, come get me, and I'll be more than happy to sit over your shoulder and try to help you figure out why you're making progress. I want to say his time was probably 15 minutes. My memory is terrible because I worked with this guy 8 years ago, like years ago. But I want to say it was like, if you're not making progress in 15 minutes, stop and come get me. If I'm in a meeting, come get me out of the meeting.
Wow.
I mean, he was that level he was a very good developer. The kind of developer that will tell you, like, good code doesn't need comments to walk you through it. It just needs to be formatted and logical enough to help you get through it.
With good names.
With good name, good variables, good casing and stuff like that. If the code is formatted properly, you really shouldn't need lots of comments. You should be able to walk through it easily. He was that kind of, it's just like next level developer.
Was he also in management?
He was in management.
Okay, well, he's looking at the bottom line. Yeah. So he's definitely figuring that out.
Oh, he spent 10, 15 years before he got into management. So he was,
Well, you can use something like the Pomodoro technique, which you should do for, productivity reasons.
Explain that.
Anyway.
Explain that.
Okay, so the Pomodoro is the Italian word for tomato. And the reason why the guy who came up with this technique had a little kitchen timer, that was in the shape of a tomato, and it would be set for like 25 minutes in which to work and try to solve whatever problem, code or whatever. When the 25 minutes were up, you had to take a break. 10, 15 minutes, work on something else.
Yeah.
And then you could do another 25 minutes. And you had, I don't remember what the exact amounts was, 2 or 4 of these sequences.
It's variable.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then you take a break, and then you had a longer period in which you could do something, but then you went back down to 25 minutes because you cannot let your brain, it's like letting a motor run,
Right.
without oil or whatever for too long.
A non-diesel motor, by the way. Yeah. What's that time for you? Everyone's time's different. I'm wondering what that time is for you.
Oh, I have not been able to code at a sustained level for a few years now, so I'm not really sure what it is.
Yeah.
But I would say no more than 90 minutes.
90 minutes, yeah.
But
That's what I was going to say, 90 minutes.
I've always been meaning to try the Pomodoro technique because that way I could, as a startup, multitask, if you will, or at least switch over to something else that needs to be done.
Yeah.
And help other things move forward as well.
I'll tell you, I probably tell this story too often, but I joined a company as a product manager / scrum master, both. But I was coupled at C levels, and I convinced the company that my time would be better spent if I was just doing the job of a product manager, which is not a far stretch because my time was better spent with customers rather than doing a bunch of stuff that Scrum Masters do. So I was like, I told the company, I was like, look, just bring a Scrum Master on, relieve me of all these efficiency type of conversations. I'm not interested in doing this stuff. I'm interested in being in front of customers. I'm interested in being in front of the leadership team. I'm interested in gathering everyone's vision for the product and kind of driving that forward. Okay, I'm interested in coupling with sales and marketing and support and all the other divisions of the company. And I just need all this Scrum Master stuff off my plate to be able to do that. So they brought a Scrum Master on for 4 or 5 months or whatever to relieve me of until the contract ended, basically. And it makes the job easier for my Scrum Master because I'm setting the vision. I could only imagine, and I've been in organizations where the product person does not do this. They do not protect the team. They throw the team under the bus, in fact. And be like, well, these developers are real slow. I don't understand what's taking them so long. They're missing all their deadlines, that kind of stuff. But the product person can make a huge impact.
Yeah.
In order to get the team ahead. And this goes back to what we were talking about earlier is your business really focused, your company really focused on learning and really focused on getting what they can take from failures to get ahead? Or is that just like the party line thing that they've learned to say because corporate America learns to say certain things and they don't really, you know what I mean? Like
it would be political. What is politically correct in the corporate arena? Yeah. These are the values we're supposed to say, and it's fine that you say them, but the actions that you take or the directives, what you give the team to do, can undermine or be completely contrary to that, and then they're not going to trust you. But and that's the big problem, is that not just whether you're experimenting and willing to fail, but where you're devoting your energies. And if you say we need to deliver it by this date, but you keep pulling developers aside and say I need to work on this and I need you to work on the other thing, you're the one that's really messing up the delivery date.
Or you keep changing the goalposts.
Yeah.
Or you keep saying, oh, we need to deliver by this date. But like that typical project manager thing, like we need to deliver by this date. But then you didn't know what all the requirements were by that date. I was in a program once where we had a pre-existing application, and it was a Microsoft shop that was not always in the Azure cloud. Okay. They were like, we want to refactor all the logging to every piece of the application that produces a log. And I wasn't product at that point. I was more like a program manager who's over the Scrum Masters and the product people. I was like, do you guys realize what you're asking?
Yeah.
Because you're asking the product people to basically put all their features in the back seat for a minute, while you guys basically introduce a feature that, if done correctly, you will see no change to the application. The users, the end users,
Right.
will see no change. I was like, listen, I completely understand what you're asking, okay? You need to think about the way you're pitching it to the business users. What do they get out of consolidated logging? I completely know what they get out of consolidated logging. With consolidated logging in the cloud, you can now pull reports off that consolidated. You can say, what are the worst errors that we're getting that we need to refactor pieces of code? What are the slowest pieces of code? What are the most errors that we get? What are the most error-prone pieces of code that we have? What are the most risky operations that we have? I was like, I'm like a program manager, but you all have product owners on your teams, and they have product managers they report to. I was like, you guys, the developers, when you do your backlog refinement, you need to bring this up with your product owners, and they need to bring it back up in a scaled level meeting, all of them together at the same time, to say, we need to stop what we're doing. We need to refactor the way we've been doing logging up until this point to come up with a new development standard. And then we all need to move forward from this point on with that new development standard. Because what we get from that development standard is invaluable. It's basically, like we were talking about before, the Deming floor of quality. It is that we're setting a new floor of quality. We product, based on the input from the developers on our teams, we are setting a new floor of what is acceptable. And we will not accept less than that floor. And your product people have to push it up and up and up and up and make it happen. The positive in this story is they actually did make it happen and actually did push that forward.
Well, again, it's that process one check correctly.
Yeah.
And then scale that up so that you can do it correctly and without error, 200 million times a year. And one of the things with Deming was that he always said it was management that's responsible for it. The worker has very little, I think it was like 5 or 10%, 5% of effect on the variation of the quality output.
Right. It was 5%.
Process. The process and the system that runs the process is responsible for 95% of the quality output.
Yeah.
And so, and that's if you have a well-defined process. If your process is chaotic, like most software development is, variation is going to be all over the place.
Yeah.
I'm of the opinion that it shouldn't be management that's doing this anymore. It should be the teams, and I think that software developers should be grouped as a professional association, like other engineering disciplines, like doctors and lawyers.
Sure.
We go through a licensing type thing for the financial applications for software that deals with public safety.
Yeah.
There needs to be strict guidelines and regulations about that.
Yeah.
Self-regulated industry, like the mechanical engineering arose from boiler manufacturers taking the responsibility to figure out how to make boilers in a responsible way, because they were blowing up and killing people. So they're like, oh, we got to learn this, and so it established mechanical engineers, and they figured out how much fatigue metal can handle with under pressure, the thickness, all of that stuff they did. We need to do something similar for software.
Yeah, airline industry is similar.
I heard the podcast you did on that, and those are examples that I take from it, because fatalities due to software is unacceptable. The most popular one is, I think it's called the Therac. I don't know if it's the Thermac or Therac 25, which it was overdose radiation and killed people.
Yeah.
AT&T switches in the 80s, I think it was. Software upgrade took down the phone network. Toyota's unintended vehicle acceleration when the driver steps on the brakes. They're just things that, due to either faulty processes in the design or the development of the software or in deployment.
Yeah.
Just we need better standards, and we need to follow those standards. And so if we have an organization like doctors or lawyers and architects, we can say these are the processes we're going to follow in developing the software.
Yeah.
And we're going to certify the software meets these criteria, that we follow these processes, and boom, this goes out there.
I'd be 100% for some kind of certification that takes money out of the equation. I've said this shouldn't be a shock to anyone because I've said this many, many times. Those courses, like, they help give you like a intro to what certain pieces of your job are, but they don't give you any in-depth mechanical ability to actually affect change in your organization. They don't help you to give you any kind of framework to say, in order to affect cultural change, in order to change the manager's opinions, or to alert the managers in an organization that there is a problem. Here's a framework I go. First, I'm going to let them know by email. And second, I'm going to give them an example by whatever. And third, I'm going to give you like that. There's nothing like that. Not that if we gave people something like that, anyone would actually listen. That's a problem, right? Because we started like the very first, in the first 5 minutes of this podcast, we started saying like, most people that get to management level, like, they're not going to listen.
Right.
Then they kind of got their own, they got their own mentality. They got their own kind of observations, and it's going to be hard to break them out of that kind of mindset, breaking mindsets.
Well, that's why the organization, like, you can't go to an architect and say, I want you to design this building. I don't know how many floors this is, 40 floors or whatever. But we don't need so many bathrooms. We don't need, we don't need, grade 85 steel or whatever, it actually is. That's too expensive.
Insulation,
this is Florida. What do we need insulation for?
Design this building, but we need like a R30 insulation. It doesn't matter. Like, but I'm not telling you where it's going to be, what kind of weather it's going to be subjected to. Yeah. They're going to ask you a million questions. You know what I mean? They're gonna, and rightfully so, because that's their occupation. One of the Deming examples is, you tell me just go over there and wash that table off, and Deming says in his book, he says, well, I have to ask you why. I need to know. It's not that I'm asking you why and I'm just being a pest, or being a pain in any way, shape, or form. I need to know, because you're telling me to wash the table, you're giving me the what, and then I'm deciding the how. But you haven't given me any business context, meaning context. Right. Like, you might decide that you just want to like put a plate down and eat some food. Okay, well, the table's plenty clean already. It doesn't have any garbage on it or whatever. Like, it's clean.
Sweep the crumbs off.
But you want to do surgery on the table. Yeah. Okay, well, that's a different deal.
That's an entirely,
Okay, that's all. Now I got to boil water and I got to do all kinds of stuff. Like, that's a different deal. So you need to start with why.
Right.
Okay?
What is the purpose?
What is the purpose?
The output of every job has to be fit for the purpose
right.
of the point or the work center following you. And once that's established, then you can establish what the tolerance level for the quality has to be.
Yeah,
what you're going to do.
I feel that that's often taken as a challenge in corporate America, and the teams that I've been in as well. Oh, well, why are you asking me? Why are you asking me all these questions? Why do I got to tell you why? Just do what I said. Just do what I say, and then anything in excess of what the real purpose was, anything in the middle between what I asked you for and what the real purpose was, like, that's like bug territory.
That is, absolutely. There's a great video I just saw yesterday. I guess it was off TikTok or whatever. Well, I saw it on Twitter, but it looked like it was pulled off of.
I was gonna say I'm too old for TikTok. I'm out.
Yeah, well, I guess there are software programmers on there, but they have this that children's toy that has the different shapes that you put the blocks that go through these shapes, and you have to fit them through. So this guy is QA, and he's saying, we have a square. What hole will this square go into? That's right. It goes through the square hole. Oh, here's a rectangle. What hole will this rectangle go through? That's right. It goes through the square. And meantime, so there's that video of QA, and then there's another one of a dev watching, and the dev is going, put it in the rectangle, put it in the rectangle. Their software, basically, that's being run by QA, and they're experiencing the shattering dilemma that how they thought their software was going to be used is not the way that it's used. So they did not prepare for a lot of the bugs that were coming out of it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. This brings me back to what we were going to talk about, but I never talked about, which was the B2B versus B2C. But again, since I forgot to talk about it, I'm just going to pivot to something else. Okay, it's what I do. I wanted to ask. There's something on this list that I came up with before that I actually really was interested in, because I dealt with this as a product person, and I'm interested in a development take on this topic.
Okay,
which is component teams versus feature teams. Okay, component teams meaning I have a team of people, and I have a front end developer and a back end developer on that team, and they cannot do each other's jobs. Mm-hmm. So I have to wait on the front end, or worse, I have a front end team and a back end team that has to pass work from one to another. Mm-hmm. Versus, a team of full stack guys. I mean, obviously, the obvious thing to go to is the full stack people are going to cost a lot more on paper. Mm-hmm. Like, that's the obvious thing, right? Let's get that out of the way and just pretend like cost. I don't know if we can get that out of the way and pretend cost is not an issue, because cost is always an issue.
Right, but we have to consider the trade-offs. So is the work produced going to be better quality? Of some variation of quality because you have one person designing the front end as well as the back end aspect of it, or is quality going to matter? And I'm trying to think of an analogy or other professions in which that is the case, where you want to think of a product being designed from the outside and then from the internals. Mm-hmm. And I would probably think that having separate people would be better, because then they can develop the understanding of, for example, the front end person can develop a better understanding of human behavior and interactions, cover a lot more stuff. But I would have to see it in practice for software to know if that's actually the case. When you think of attractions like attractions or cars or anything like that, you usually have one person, architects, but you have a structural engineer who actually decides where beams and columns and walls go. For this, I think the big problem is you need to have a separate group in there as well, the BAs, mm-hmm. who produce models of the interactions within the domain. For example, for a banking application, they design, how checking accounts work, how ATMs or whatever, mm-hmm. and the different types that exist in there, currencies, interest, all of that stuff. Yeah. And they design all the interactions that those sorts of things have.
I kind of see where you're going, which is there is a larger process to be taken into consideration, mm-hmm. and somebody needs to be the go-between to kind of help everyone
navigate through.
Every team kind of navigate. My argument back to that is anybody I add to the teams extends the capabilities of the team members, mm-hmm. right? So if I add it, let's say we're doing financial applications. Let's stick with the example that your mind is already in. If we're doing financial applications, and it's super in depth, regulations, all kinds of stuff. I'm gonna need someone who is a domain expert to tell me how each piece of the system touches. Now, that could be a BA, most certainly. Like I am probably less of a hardcore agilist, whatever, than most people, where I say like those people certainly have a role in the model. A BA could be considered a subject matter expert, but I also have been in situations where the BA basically works directly for the product owner, product manager, whatever, who sits with the team and basically extends the capabilities of the product person with regard to the deep analysis functions and the actual writing of stories and acceptance criteria, taking a first pass before the team gets to it. Because generally speaking, the product person is higher level, and then you need someone to dig deeper.
Oh, yeah.
Because otherwise, what you end up doing is you end up passing along that need to dig deeper to the development team. And then either a developer has to go figure it out, or they just code something and the QA person has to go figure it out. But basically, somebody has to go figure it out from the development team, right? Or the BA tries to gather as much as they can in advance of the team working on that function, whatever it is, the business function.
Right.
So, like, I kind of feel your first pass is the product. And working for product, you could have a BA. Your second pass is the developer working on it. And then they might go super deep, basically saying, well, your requirements didn't identify all this, X, Y, Z. And then the third pass is the QA person saying, well, your code and your requirements didn't figure out X, Y, Z, ABC, whatever. So there are several loops built into the system.
Right.
So that stuff can be built into traditional Agile teams that don't have a BA in the process because it's delegated to the product person. But then the product person reserves the right to delegate that to somebody else. They could have I've seen product people with armies to bring new requirements in, to mobilize basically. And all that stuff comes out of the budget funding the product at the end of the day. Maybe you don't even have BAs that work for your particular product. Maybe BAs in your organization are a shared service. And you say, well, this week I need 75% of this BA's time. But then in the next 2 weeks after that, I need like 10% just for them to show up to my meetings, double check their work. And then when we go back into a productive period, now I need 75% again. I don't know. Yeah,
well, it's certainly possible. It's much like organizations in the 50s and the 60s where you had secretarial pools, you had executive pools where, you can pull an executive in to work with you for a few things, and then he goes back into the pool. But taking examples from animation, you have a lot of people that do a lot of artwork before they start drawing a single cartoon.
Right, yeah.
You have people that do color scheming. You have concept art where they're just drawing any idea related to the story to see what triggers any other ideas for other people. Yeah. You have character design.
Concept art.
Set design.
It's a great one. We
concept art.
I need to put a pin in that one because what old school traditional budget does that go on? It does. You don't have a product yet.
Yeah.
The concept artist might be throwing things out when the product person is pitching something. So maybe you have some sort of budget that has to do with pitching a new idea, but in traditional software, that's not really a thing. Budgeting for something that we're thinking about doing is not really a thing.
Or not only that, it's just ideation,
that's not a thing. Software development, that's not a thing. The ideation,
which is wrong.
I'll give you an example. I'll give you a great example. I had a software team doing middle of the night pajama parties to do their installations. You know what I'm talking about.
I know, yeah.
They wanted to get out of the middle of the night pajama party game of installing new versions, which meant they wanted to move all their stuff to release pipelines through Azure Cloud.
Okay.
No user asked for that. No user asked for that, and they had to figure out how to do it, how much it cost, how much of the times, how many sprints it would take to get the first version, the second version, et cetera. All the servers that currently have that software, rolled into the rollout process of the release pipelines, and all that stuff was magic. Nobody, no ROI, unless I guess maybe the ROI was all the team's time after hours, which basically was free time anyway because it was after hours.
Yeah, they're not.
There was no cost to it.
They don't figure that into accounting.
No, because it was all the developers.
Yeah.
They were all salaried.
Right.
All that time was after hours anyway, so it basically was zero cost to the company. So basically now you're taking real operational time, and you're burning that to figure out how to do something. And the ideal outcome is they figure out how to deploy all the software, and nobody ever notices that a difference was made. That's the outcome. So real hard sell to the business. When we talk about it out loud, it sounds real silly because of course you're going to do that. What are you going to do? Manual deployments and bring your whole server down for 6 hours in the middle of the night on a Saturday, Sunday night?
But you have to point out the cost and the risks involved with doing that sort of thing versus introducing into your teams the capabilities of doing continuous deployments, continuous integration, and building up a DevOps team. And what does that mean to your competitive ability?
Yeah.
And if you don't get into that, the drawbacks to not doing it, like the old joke, one manager says to the VP, what if we train this guy and he leaves the company? And the VP says, well, what if we don't train him and he stays? It's there's going to be a big cost if you don't change. And the risk is that you're going to be left behind.
Right.
The CFOs and the finance guys, for their jobs, change is also cool. So if you can couch the what you're proposing in those terms, they tend to go along with, I'll sound like, and then maybe get the CEO position or whatever. And that's the thing, I guess, marketing those ideas to the finance people, but putting it into those terms, what is the risk to not making the change? Plus, the ROI is the reduced operating expenses in not doing it, and the downtime
I could see pitching that to just say, let me gather how much time we've spent just in the last 6 weeks, how much extra time my developers have been spending, because usually it directly impacts the developers. I can only imagine ever being a developer and be like, I'm not willing to work.
I'm not doing this anymore. Apple's having a similar problem.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Their developers, because they're calling the developers back into the spaceship.
Yeah.
And the developers are saying, no, I'm not. So many of them have to live 2 hours away from Cupertino.
Oh, I see.
Because they can't afford housing, that's nearby.
Right.
So they don't want to do that commute. And so the bosses there, Google and other companies, are up in arms because so many of their employees are no longer willing to do that.
Man, I've told this story before. I worked with several third world development firms where all the developers work in compounds, like they work in company owned compounds. Yeah. This is a very poignant memory. Okay, that I remember, and I told my development manager at the time because he paid the bills. I was like, I am not giving these people any more money. He's like, oh, they have testers on staff. They cost half the price of what an American tester would cost. You should totally get
a crew of testers out there in whatever third world country we were doing business with at the time. I don't remember what it was. I'm like, I'm not doing business with these people. Their families live at compounds, and they're holding their whole family hostage.
That's crazy.
To say, as long as you work with my company, your family is safe working in this, living in this compound. But the minute you don't work at my company anymore, like, what happens? I specifically remember having this conversation with my development management. I was like, I don't want to be in this business. I don't want to be in the indentured servitude business.
It's like the sex trade.
I was like, I understand your perspective. The
Cost saving, whatever.
At that point in time, I very, very, very distinctly remember telling development, I am not okay with the concept of looking the other way just so I can save $10 an hour, so I can be on some OPEX versus CAPEX nonsense so you can report capitalized budgets or whatever. I was like, dude, I can find you a better way of doing things. Okay, and if it really, really is the choice of slave labor versus doing the right thing, I was like, listen, I will work another 15 hours a week as the manager of the department. I will get you what you need. Okay, and my employees will get you. I will get you what you need, as opposed to whatever you're engaged in over here.
Yeah.
It's not like real.
That's
like,
terrible.
Not bright spots in develop, but this is very common.
That's terrible because it's the same thing that Apple had as its problem with Foxconn and its others, third-party manufacturers, where employees were jumping out of windows because they couldn't handle it anymore. It's just the mental breakdowns,
right.
And
the company's response, rather than just paying them a little bit of wage, is install nets, so they don't kill themselves.
We didn't do that. We didn't make slave labor out of them, but you have it's worse in the sweatshop. But and the other thing is that these guys are not improving the process at all. No. And if you directly control it, like I said, if you directly control the process with Deming and you do the statistical process control and measure things, and then so that you can see where your quality and waste are occurring, then you can improve the process, reduce the waste, speed up your productivity, and be faster than those teams, so that your expenses actually go down. See, now if you measure productivity or your returns based on your function points, so now we're able to do more function points over time. So the cost per function point, if you're giving your finance guys, hey, this is the cost per function point, this is the number of bugs per function points that are produced, et cetera, then you have numbers that you can give to justify, okay, if we make these improvements to the processes, we can speed up the process.
When you say function points, are you talking about features? What are you talking about?
Function points are a way of measuring parts of the code that do a specific operation, reading a variable, writing a value into the variable, performing a function call. It's a way of, instead of saying lines of code, we measure certain activities, the behaviors, operations that the code is doing. And by measuring the operations directly and quantifying them, then we can give actual, output, worker output. So that we can say, okay, well, instead of saying, oh, well, he was able to do 80 debugged lines of code today. 150 would be phenomenal. Usually 50 to 80 is the norm of debugged lines of code, because when you write code, expect a certain number of lines to have bugs. But if you quantify the function points, the operations that are being done, and then keep metrics on those numbers, then you can begin to say, okay, we're able to output this much. Certain number of defects appear over a certain number of those function points. And then you can begin to tweak the process so that you make those numbers better. But without having a reliable, consistent metric that applies, it's hard. You can't do that. But when you do that, then you can help change come to place for both the development team and the management. Because then you can say, okay, stakeholders are coming up and interrupting our developers and pulling them on other projects, et cetera. So we saw a drop in productivity and function points.
I was in an organization one time that felt the need to, it was something along the lines of a shared, I think Slack lets you do this now. It lets you share a Slack channel with people outside your organization. Yeah, it was something like that, where the developers were part of a Slack channel shared with an outside organization. It was more like a customer organization. And I, as a product person at the time, was like, this is a terrible idea. Why would I want this feature? Why would I expose my development team to that? It was terrible. I was like, maybe a lead, one single lead, maybe. But I was like, my whole team?
As if Slack wasn't enough of a productivity killer to
Oh my
begin with.
goodness. Like, it's like these people, yeah, but they don't understand context switching. I mean, they don't understand the idea that like somebody pings you in the middle of the day to be like, right quick. I need the 5-minute fix. I need this 5-minute. They don't understand that. I understand why they make those demands, but
see, now that's the thing. If you have these metrics in place to say, okay, there was a drop in productivity because, manager interrupted, whatever. If you quantify the cost of the developer and the cost per hour, cost per function point, and you show the drop in productivity from the interruptions and how long it takes to ramp up to be able to measure function point output over time. You can almost imagine it's like a car. It takes time to ramp up speed again. If we graph that and say, okay, here's where he got interrupted, here's where we can pick up again, and then you say, okay, every time you do that, it costs the company $4,000. It costs the company $800, whatever it is, per incident. Measure that up over your project. Now, this is what you cost the company on this project.
I would expect you're very close to the real number right there. Like, especially smaller companies. Every time that you are sending a garbage Slack message that your developers all have to be part of because you added them or whatever, you're burning $1,000.
Oh, yeah.
That's close. That's close. I mean, look, what is a developer going to do if they see a Slack message that says, hey, this function that you worked on, like sometimes it doesn't do whatever, but sometimes it does, and it's not really working as expected. You're going to be like, oh, that's my code. I'm going to investigate a little. Let me dig in and figure out, let me do a little debugging, maybe add some breakpoints here and there. I expected that to break. Is that where it's breaking? You're going to dig into it, man, even if it's not being reported through official
and if
channels.
It's not in the sprint.
And it's not in the sprint. Absolutely. It's not in the sprint. It goes all the way back to what we said at the beginning, which is I'm willing to show you my code, okay? To walk you through how I solve this problem. Showing you my code, I don't even know what allegory to tell you, like how personal it is to not only like the easiest way to bring it up is here's my code, it's not working. Okay, that's the easiest way. The harder way is here's my code, it is working. What are better ways that I could have done to solve this from someone who is more experienced in that realm? I mean, like if anything doesn't scream fixed mindset, overgrowth mindset, it's like I'm telling, and speaking as someone who has done this before and has a huge amount of anxiety, being like, here's what my code looks like. Sitting down with a professional Java developer, showing them my amateur QA engineering code of here's how I'm going to test the APIs. I mean, like, I'm not a professional developer. So showing someone who is a professional developer my Java code that I just learned to write by myself. Like, that's a huge, to my own personal ego, huge risk.
But the developers have that same problem. That's why code reviews, a lot of developers don't want to do code reviews because they're like...
That's why they'd be scared of it. Yes.
There is, you talked about in the book Mindset, athletes and how they don't, when they become professional, don't graduate. I use a similar story when I talk about star athletes in their schools.
Yeah.
From high school, star quarterback. Yeah. Goes to college. He was a star in his high school because that's the people that live in his neighborhood or whatever in the county. When it's in college, it's at the state level.
Yeah.
There's a fewer number of positions because there's only one of those colleges and a lot more people applying for those positions. So your skill level has to be higher, and a lot of star players don't make it. Then, if they want to be professional, if they had dreams of being a professional as a child, once they get out of college, there's only, 32 teams, 34 teams?
Yes. Yeah.
And so 34, maybe double it, 68 quarterbacks.
Yeah.
And quarterbacks from every college is trying for that.
Yeah.
The fallout is humongous. So their egos are going to take a beating. And it's the same thing with software development. You think you're a great software development because you coded, you learned, blah, 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 way back then. And you've taught yourself and you've gotten to this level. That's fine. But now you're dealing with other professionals.
Right.
And it's one thing when you're the only, you as a teenager are programming and your teachers don't. And you that's fine. But you're in a professional level now and you have to deal with other professionals.
Yeah.
You got to keep your mouth shut. You need to work with other people. You're not the star anymore.
I wouldn't even say you got to keep your mouth shut. I would say you need to understand the fixed versus closed mindset, okay? Because the fixed mind, I'll give you a perfect example of the fixed mindset, okay? The fixed mindset is I was coupled with someone at one point at a client who was a much better Scrum Master than I will ever be, okay? Because what the individual could do was they could connect with the way someone felt about a subject, vet it out of them, how they felt about something, and then connect them with how everybody else on the team feels about something.
Wow, okay.
And now when you're out of the meeting, 1 hour spent, you all emotionally feel the same way about a direction or conversation or goal that a team is trying to take. I was a product person observing that from a Scrum Master. And when I saw the Scrum Master doing that with a team and stakeholders and product people, I was like, I can't do this. I don't even want to try. I didn't even want to try. That is a fixed mindset talking, which is somebody else is so successful at this, I don't even want to try to do it. That's the definition of a fixed mindset. I know with tweaks to the way that I do things, I could achieve the same thing that particular Scrum Master was doing. It would take more time embedded with more teams and more effort trying to bring them together, trying different things, right? Trying different things. I feel like that stuff, I don't know why, that stuff does not translate to management. And that's what annoys me so much on the podcast. And that's why I rail against it so much on the podcast.
Of what? What isn't translating?
The concept of if you have employees and they're not knocking things out in what you think is an efficient manner, leave it alone. Coach them to just put it off. come back the next day and revisit it the next day when they're fresh.
Mm-hmm.
Or put it off to the side, invite one of their teammates in to look at it with them,
Mm-hmm.
and maybe get a fresh perspective. Either one of those activities probably has a much greater chance of solving it.
Well, you can use the metric way to show them why the way they're doing it is resulting in worse effects and has knock-on effects and making things bad. What is the more important thing here? Getting a certain result or the way in which they approach the result? Are you trying to, like in the military, a general says, take this hill, or gives them an objective.
The what? They give them the what.
They give them the what.
Correct, yes.
They don't tell the how.
No.
Just give them a directive. Let them figure it out. If there's a problem with being unable to accomplish it, maybe you have to provide supplies or whatever. But otherwise, they're the ones at the front. They know the conditions. They can figure it out. That is one of the reasons why military people, officers, are usually try to get them in the organizations, because they know this. Other people who have not, other managers who have not learned this aspect of it, tell them the what, they're going to have to micromanage, and they get too many problems. But I guess that's how do you how do you coach managers, right? So that's and executives. How do you do the coaching up?
Well, at least we had a podcast with a friend of mine who is in the military, and he's like, hey, in the military, if they're in a leadership position, at least we've sent them to school, and that we've at least tried to help impart leadership ability onto them, like whether they picked it up or not, or whether they ignored it because they were stressed or whatever. Like, that's a different deal, but at least we've tried to impart leadership ability. In corporate America, it's like, oh my goodness, like, what do? You just try to hire somebody and you hope.
Yeah. That's another thing. The training mentality of corporate America. I mean, to me, that training is one of the most important things. Training is so vital to the Disney organization. They make it mandatory. At all levels. So, I mean, even the cast members at the theme parks, you know, if you're dressed up in a costume, they're going to make you go through training because they want you to have a certain vibe for that particular character. And you know, the animators, of course, as I said, they learn from setting up their own school and training. You know, that's the way to get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah.
So I would think of it as important because you want to instill your values into the team members, the organization, from top to bottom, what your viewpoint is. And, you know, just because you have an MBA from Stanford or Harvard or whatever, doesn't mean that these people are going to come in with the values that you have, or actually know the things that and how to manage people, how to lead.
Well, I feel this is the podcast that I've always wanted to do. I have no problem going 3 hours in a podcast. I feel that people that work in corporate software development, like in this, it's been like an underlying theme in this podcast. Like people are not sharing their experiences. Everyone has to kind of like build up from the ground up
every time,
unnecessarily.
Exactly.
Yeah, unnecessarily. There's not a good reason for that. I don't understand it. And I'd be fine every single podcast I do. I'd be fine going 3 hours if I can go super deep talking to people about their experiences, because I think as people listen to the podcast, they'll start realizing that, like, oh, all these people's experiences have a certain theme or certain undertones that are very, very similar. You know, the developers that are going on producing software for these companies that are not connected in any way, shape, or form, they all have basically the same problems. Well, product doesn't tell us exactly what we need, or product doesn't connect us to the company or the customer, and product is not giving us the most effective way to develop, or our development leadership is not helping us develop the most effective way of producing software. There's so many people, especially people that are more junior in their careers, that are struggling
Up and down, entirely up and down through the hierarchy. But see, the thing is that they're dependent on their technical team to be able to know what to do and to do it.
Yeah.
So really the best solution is like having that architectural or doctor's practice.
Right.
You know, you have ethics, you have discipline when you design a building. Software needs to do that.
Yeah.
And say, these are the steps.
Yeah.
And when the company tries to
Shortcut.
change that,
Yeah.
customize it,
Right.
whatever, if it's more effective, oh, that's a good idea. We'll adopt it and share it with other people so that we can raise the state of the art. But otherwise, they say, that's like wanting to take shortcuts in surgery or the construction of a building or the space shuttle or something like that. You want to say, we're not going to do that.
Yeah.
We're going to follow the procedures.
Yeah.
It takes longer. It may cost more, but it's going to save money by avoiding the risk of problems that are going to come later.
Yeah. We should probably cut it off here because I want to try to leave as much of the 3 hours in as possible. Because
You might have to make it topical.
Topical. It all anchors around the Disney animation concept. Because just from the stories that I know, and we probably could have dug into this a lot more.
Much more. Because we've been talking about the Disney organization providing training and how it really made them. I mean, do you think about it? The Disney organization. Walt was left with 4 animators because his distributor hired the rest away from him.
Yeah, right, yeah.
So he and took Oswald the Lucky Rabbit. So that's when he came up with Mickey Mouse. But he had, out of his whole staff, 4 animators left. And he had to build up his studio again from that point.
Yeah.
And when he did, the training and everything made them a small-time operator. Think about it. He had already filed for bankruptcy before.
And this was not at his key. That his key people went with the other organization.
That's right. But pushing the processes forward and all the things that Walt had for his vision took him from a small-time operator and him from a failed businessman to being the top animator, the top films, not the top film studio in everything, because they didn't do live action as much until later. And it's because those values of training to be a championship organization, just like in sports.
I'm gonna cut it off and stop here because
we keep going on.
Yeah. Oh man. If it cuts down to 2 hours, I would be so excited about 2 hours because those are the podcasts I want to have. I feel like there are more topics. We went all around the world. We probably only went through a third of the random things that I have written down.
All right.
But man, this has been a fun conversation.
Thanks.
Yeah. Thank you very much.
Happy to be here. Thank you.
If you watch the last 6 to 20 seconds of any podcast, it may not make any sense because that's where I move the content that I really, really like, but it doesn't make sense anywhere else. Yeah. I just gave away a secret of editing. I had 2 coffees this morning. You can tell I had 2 coffees this morning.